I'm Jose Linares, very happy to be with you on our final session. So let's jump right in and get to work. Welcome to lesson 4 of our leading with safety and driving change and innovation through teams. So I think you've all realized over the last few sessions that everything is starting to come together. So we've been talking about psychological safety, we've been talking about team composition, hierarchies, and now we're bringing everything together. So let's do a quick review on the prior topics. So 1, psychological safety. Obviously, this is probably one of our most important responsibilities, is to ensure that the environments that we've created for our teams and in our workplace are ones where people feel comfortable and safe in being able to speak up, to bring ideas, to have disagreements, where they don't feel a pressure that what they're saying or doing is inappropriate or doesn't go with the norm. And that's a very important component, and it was the first building block in our lessons with putting these teams together. The next is team composition, another important factor. Obviously, human beings are very different people, and not everyone behaves the same way. So as we look to build our teams, whether those are our direct report teams or, as we've discussed and we'll discuss a little bit in the coming lesson, multidisciplinary teams, we have to make sure that the personalities make sense. Sometimes we interview people and we think, wow, they're perfect. They have all the skills, they have all the knowledge, they have incredible experience. This is the type of personality that I'm looking for. But when you take that person and you drop them into your team, do they really fit? Are they really a part of that team? And is it going to work, right? And not when things are great. Is it going to work when things get difficult? Is it going to work when uncomfortable topics need to be discussed, when uncomfortable situations come up? And that's a big component of team composition. We talked about hierarchies and the importance of a hierarchy. So we need to know what the steps in the chain are. Who are the people that are making decisions? At what points in the process are those people responsible for making decisions? This leads to an organized, well played out workflow, which, if done correctly, will give you the outcomes that you're looking for. We also discussed that hierarchies can sometimes be roadblocks. If you have personalities that get in the way or egos that get in the way, that hierarchy becomes almost a soapbox to either lecture or to demand, and it stops being simply the line that helps us follow the right steps, make the right decisions, involve the right people at the right times in the process. So 3 very important elements that we have to take into account as we continue to look at our existing teams and we look at the future in building new teams. So what are we all now we've got this team, we've put it together. What do we need to do? Well, we need to drive change, right? The focus of our teams is to have an objective, meet that objective, and look for opportunities to improve, to grow, and to change. So sometimes individuals think that they can drive change, and individuals can make noise, but change can only be really driven by a well-focused team that's led by a manager, a leader that understands the importance of that meaningful change. So I put just a little statement here that teams, not individuals, drive change. An individual can make noise, can make a lot of noise, but only a focused, well-led team can drive meaningful and impactful change. Okay? So what are our goals for the lesson today? So 1, we're going to identify the elements that we need in a team to drive high-quality healthcare. 2, we're going to revisit and understand how we build these teams, and specifically for multidisciplinary collaboration. And we'll get into some detail on that with a couple of nuances and a couple of twists. Then we'll weave in the importance that psychological safety plays in creating an environment that promotes innovation. And finally, we'll look at some real-world examples and some tools that'll help us promote that innovation within our teams. So, what are the elements that we need in our teams to help us drive safe and effective high-quality care? There's a few things. Some of this we've discussed already. And as we remember from the readings in Rosen, there are four critical points that he brings up. One is a shared mental model. Now, simply put, a shared mental model is a mission, right? It's the mission that we discussed. What are the patient's goals? What are the caregiver's goals? What are the team's goals? And, what's the role that each member is going to play in this process to get the desired outcome? So we talk about patient and caregiver goals, and it's interesting that sometimes those are extremely overlooked, and it makes the job of the clinician, it makes the job of that team a little more complicated when we haven't spoken to that patient and we haven't spoken to that caregiver. And I'll give you a great example. So one of the functions that my team plays here on a daily basis is consuming orders that are written by our physicians and either providing equipment to patients' homes or providing nursing care, therapy, other types of services in patients' homes. And for the most part, orders should be pretty black and white. This is the patient's diagnosis. This is the desired service or piece of equipment to assist the patient with that diagnosis. And this is how we're going to do these things. Well, one of the most important parts of processing that order and getting in front of that patient is having a conversation with that patient. How many times have you been in a situation where you have a conversation with one of your employees and you've outlined what your expectation is, you've outlined what the resources are to meet that expectation, then you get a different outcome. And when you start digging, none of the things that you talked about actually happen the way you spoke about it. Chances are your employee heard what they wanted to hear and deduced the rest from prior experience, their knowledge, and followed the steps that they felt were appropriate. A lot of times we do that with our patients and with patient care. We see the order from the doctor. We assume based on diagnosis or a comment from the doctor that the patient understands and was explained everything that is going to happen or that needs to happen. And we become a horse with blinders. We move forward, we process an order, and we're off to the races. Only to find out that the next person in that hierarchy, in that chain of care, gets to the patient's home and presents the patient with the service or the equipment, only to find out that this is absolutely not what the patient spoke to the doctor about. They have no interest whatsoever in utilizing this piece of equipment or accepting the service that we're going to provide. And in the end, we failed to meet the objective, which was to provide the patient with effective, high-quality care. We most likely upset the patient because they felt as the most important player in this project, no one listened to them. Most importantly, their physician. And sadly, initially, they're going to think that it wasn't their physician. It was the person executing on that order that didn't listen to what their physician had to say. So we end up putting the person who's in front of the patient in a difficult situation and inevitably delaying care to that patient. So understanding patient caregiver goals is just as, if not more important than understanding the goals of the team and understanding the goals of the overall process to achieve the desired outcome. Second, and extremely important, is communication. So we've talked about how communication can help or hurt in many situations. And in this case, how would you communicate to avoid an error? This example that I gave is a perfect example of a handoff. We have a physician who saw a patient, spoke to that patient, discussed what he or she felt was the appropriate level of care, devices for care, services for care, and wrote an order. The physician handed off that order to the next person in the hierarchy chain, the person processing the order for the team that's going to execute. Except that the person processing that order failed to make a phone call, failed to talk to that patient, failed to read back to that patient what his or her physician told us he or she wanted done, and just assumed that nothing had been lost in the communication, proceeded to move forward, and in the end we saw an issue with the service or the devices that were going to be delivered to that patient. So communication is an extremely important part of having proper handoffs and avoiding errors. Next is situational awareness. So how do we stay on top of everything, right? How do we manage the patient expectations, the physician's expectations, the family's expectations, our employees' expectations? Unknowns, right? We're going to walk into a patient room. We're going to walk into a patient home. We're going to walk into an emergency room. Everything isn't black and white all the time. These are, we're dealing with human beings and things change. So what can we do as leaders to give our team the appropriate tools to stay aware of what's going on around them, to understand that this isn't just about what you have directly in front of you. This is about everything that's going on around you that could potentially impact what's going on directly in front of you. And how do we anticipate those unexpected events or those changes and are prepared to act? Obviously, a lot of what we do is improvised. And by improvised, I don't mean we take it out of our pocket and we just throw it in the air. Improvised meaning that it's not what you were preparing for. It's not what you had planned for, but it's something that you are perfectly capable of handling. We have to make sure that our team members are trained, that our team members have been in these scenarios, even if it's in practice. And we'll talk about training as well and how important it is to make sure that we plan and prepare for these types of situations to give our teams the most effective tools to be able to handle, situations such as these. And then creating the environment, like we've been talking about, of welcoming ideas, questions, suggestions. As we have said over and over again, this is not black and white. There's a lot going on in our healthcare environment, and everyone that plays a role or that touches a patient, touches a process, works in a hospital, works in a clinic, works in a customer service area, is being presented with different opportunities, with different situations on a daily basis, therefore creating the opportunity for great ideas, for great collaboration, for great questions. But we as leaders have to make sure that the environment that we've created for that welcomes it and makes that person feel comfortable speaking up, giving their idea, and making their suggestion. So why is this important? I think we've beat this one pretty hard. People will behave and respond mostly to their environment. When they get tired of behaving or responding in a way that's not in line with what they feel is appropriate or what they feel is correct, they'll look to change their environment. It's that simple. Rarely do you find people that, as we say, are gluttons for punishment and stay in an environment where they feel that they're constantly being beat down, that no progress is being made, that nothing is happening the way that it should. So it's important for us as leaders, to more times than not, take a step back and remember that ultimately we are doers, without a doubt. We are the last line of defense. We have to make sure that things get done. But more importantly, we have to be observers and we have to be thinkers. The most important part of our job is to do just that, is to think and to look at things and see things that others may or may not see, and identify that person who's a little frustrated, identify the one who's always got great opportunities or great ideas. Maybe put those two people together. The person who's frustrated and the person who's coming up with great ideas. Sometimes we will accept and take more from our peers than we will from our superiors for a number of reasons. It could be embarrassment, it could be comfort level, it could be an unwelcoming environment by the superior. But more times than not, we feel much more comfortable talking to the person that sits next to us all day for 8 hours than we do talking to the person who we go to for questions, but is also the person potentially that reprimands us when something isn't done right, the person who's driving discipline, the person who's making sure that everything is done the way it's supposed to get done. So think about that as you look at the team that you've built and how you're putting them together to ensure that we're driving that safe and effective, high quality care. We move on to the next point, which is how do we bring the right individuals into these teams, and specifically multidisciplinary teams. And I say multidisciplinary teams because teams that perform the same function day in and day out are a little bit easier to put together. There, what you're looking for is personalities that match a certain skill set and the ability to follow orders and just go. A multidisciplinary team is a little bit different. yes, you in traditional unidisciplinary teams, you're looking at personalities and you're looking at behaviors. But when you're talking about multidisciplinary, it's not just personalities and behaviors. You're looking at people that have completely different skill sets than other members of the team. You're looking at potentially much more highly trained individuals than some of the other people on the team. You are looking at potentially people who are higher up in the hierarchy than other members of the team. So you really are looking at leaders, in our case, physicians, nurses, lay staff, coordinators, all these different types of people that now you're not only managing their personalities, you're managing the skill set. And as we discussed in the prior lesson, you don't want to overload a team with one specific skill set. You don't want to have a team that needs one physician to have four physicians. Because unfortunately, and I'm sure you've seen this, what ends up happening is every time you discuss a case, you're going to get four different clinical opinions about the same thing. All four may be correct, but all four coming from different human beings with a different thought process, potentially different training, different education, different life experiences. And instead of solving the problem, you're just bogging down the process and making it more difficult, and ultimately probably frustrating the rest of the members of the team and even those physicians in the process. So we have to be very deliberate when we're designing the structure and defining who the members of this team are going to be. So if you're putting together that multidisciplinary team, we go back to the beginning. What's the mission? What are we trying to do? It may not be a clinical multidisciplinary team. You may be looking at moving into a new clinic. So the doctor is important, but not the most important player in that scenario. You need the architect. You need the person who's going to help you find the right location for that clinic. You need someone that understands the demographics around that clinic. Are we setting it up the right way? Are we bringing in the right staff? You need the people that are going to design the workflows within that clinic. It may work the same as clinics you have somewhere else, but it may not. So you're bringing different skill sets, different experiences, different knowledge that all have to work together. In the end, the architect's going to want to design and build this clinic the way he or she feels is the best possible way to do it. The real estate person is going to want to find the absolute best location that makes the most sense from a marketing standpoint, from a cost standpoint. The data person is going to want to make sure that if I'm going to spend all this money on a new clinic, I have a good demographic mix where I'm going to attract members to my clinic and actually have a going concern. Then the human resource component has to find the right people to work in this clinic. And sometimes we overlook this, but culture plays a huge role in the success or failure, not just of the team, but of the project. And if you overload your team for a specific project in a specific demographic area, and you don't pay attention to the cultural aspects, you may be dooming yourself from the start, simply because there'll be a lack of connection and a lack of communication with your desired audience. So think of that, not just when you're building your team, but as you're looking at projects and you're going into areas, what are the things that are going to be important and help the overall success of the project and the team? And expanding boundaries of expert and areas of expertise. So sometimes we get landlocked on a specific mission, right? And we say we've always done this in this box, and these are the people that we've always needed. This is the information that we've always looked at. These are the departments we've always gotten involved, and we're going to do it the same way. Most of the time, that would probably work. What I will tell you, and I can tell you this from personal experience, in terms of working, it works, right? It's worked before. Why won't it work today? But what you lose is the opportunity to innovate. You lose the opportunity to do something different, to make a marked change in a process, in a service that's being provided. And I'll give you a great example. So 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, I was asked to come to León to begin this new division. And, very exciting, a lot of opportunities, a lot of great people to work with. So the first thing I had to do was I had to build my team, right? Because I can't do it by myself. I had a lot of great ideas and I could make a lot of noise, but I wasn't going to drive the change and bring the innovation and the opportunity and the expertise that a team would. So what's the first thing I did? I went back to the well. I looked at my prior teams and who were the people that I knew could work well together, could implement the type of change that we needed, could move as nimble as could be to get this off the ground in the timeline that we have been given. So I brought my right hand in, and you had the opportunity to meet her the other day. Her name is Bridget Montez. And Bridget had a very specific expertise, a very focused mindset, a very process-driven individual, exactly what you need when you're building something and when you don't have anything except ideas, a goal, and a timeline. So now there were two of us. Hardly a team, but much better than just me throwing ideas against the wall. So we had to start building a process. We had to start from the beginning. And where I'm getting at with boundaries is, we came in with a mindset. We came in with over 20 years of experience doing this in a specific environment with very specific criteria, with very specific teams, resources, personalities. And of course, we were going to bring that same frame of thought to our new business. Well, I'll tell you what we found ourselves doing more times than not was being confronted with a situation, standing in a room, looking at each other and saying, why aren't we doing this? And we'd go back and say, well, we had a policy before that didn't allow us to do it. And then we said, yeah, but why? Why couldn't we do that? And in the end, we realized that a lot of the things that we hadn't done and that now were causing us to question was we had created these boundaries based on a previous experience, previous resources, previous company culture, and we were stuck. The moment we started to expand those boundaries, expand that expertise, and really take a chance, we realized that we hadn't even touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of service, in terms of the things that we could drive with this new project, with this new opportunity that had been presented to us. So as great and as comfortable as it is to be in your box and the thing that stick your toe in the water a little further out. You'd be surprised how quickly things are just going to spiral and how many more doors and opportunities are going to open up and present themselves to you. And I challenge you guys to take this back and look at your teams, look at some of the projects and opportunities that you've been presented. And, and maybe you'll laugh at how many of those you approached with a fixed mindset, with very little room to make any changes. And if you look now and try to find some areas where you think you could have pushed those boundaries, you'd probably be surprised at what you're going to find. The other thing we need to do is invite different leaders to guide sessions and processes based on expertise. Now, I don't mean bring supervisors and directors and people from other departments, which you can absolutely do. What I mean is create the leader within your team. Select that person who looks like they have something to say, who has produced either great work product or had great ideas. Give them the lead and the baton. Let that person lead the session. Obviously, there has to be discipline. There has to be a structure to that session. What's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish in this session? What do we need in terms of tools to get there? And what's the idea that this other person has based on obviously their training, their prior experience, and some specific expertise that they may have to bring this session into fruition and to drive this process a little differently. When we do that and we give people an opportunity to lead, we're going to find two things, right? We're going to find out who are the people that have a leader within them and hadn't really shown it, or we kind of knew they were, and now they're really showing it. And who are the ones that are smart, hardworking, know the process, know the work, but have no idea or goal ever to be a leader. They are head down, do the work. You tell me what you want me to do, and I'm going to hammer away and I'm going to get it done. All very important components of that team and things that we look for as we build that team. One of the things that we started doing here that I thought was a great idea was we create opportunities for shadowing across departments. You give team members an opportunity to see what goes on in these other areas. We get caught up as human beings, regardless of what our job is. We get caught up in scenarios, in environments, in routines, and we just become that horse with blinders that's chugging along. We're doing what we're doing until we hit a stop, and we hit a roadblock or a stop, and we start looking for who to blame. Unfortunately, is the first. Well, why did this happen? Why did this person not get the service they needed? Why was the wrong piece of equipment delivered? Why was the doctor's order misinterpreted? Why was this phone on hold for 2 minutes? What we don't do is we never ask, what's going on in that other department? What's going on in the clinic? What happened when the doctor went to write the order? Are we assuming that the doctor had the patient in front of them, spoke to the patient, and immediately proceeded to write the order, remembering every single word they had discussed with the patient? Maybe. What if that doctor got a call in the middle of talking to that patient and placing that order because another patient had presented at urgent care with a medical emergency, and the doctor had to leave the room and said to the MA, please finish with this patient, I have to go take care of somebody else? Not his fault, right? Maybe some of of what the patient heard from the doctor and repeated to the medical assistant wasn't exactly what the doctor said, but that's what ended up in the doctor's order. So, understanding what's going on in other departments is very important. So one of the things that we did here is we created an opportunity, and we did it for everybody. It was pretty interesting, from executives all the way down to lay staff. We opened up an opportunity for other team members to spend time in different departments shadowing the work of their peers. I'll tell you, my favorite was to see some of my executives jumping in trucks to deliver medical equipment with our medical equipment staff. And I will tell you, we opened the opportunity to everyone. Sadly, only a handful of people took that opportunity. I'll tell you that the people that did take that opportunity are the ones that to this day understand exactly what it takes to do what that one person does, understands why the personality is so important, understands why the person's culture, background, education are so important, understands why we in the department that happens to oversee that team have to take certain steps and can't treat those team members the same way that a person who drives a bus and picks up patients and brings them to the clinic does. So spending time walking in someone else's shoes is an unbelievable opportunity to better understand who they are, what they do, and how things work. And I'll tell you from personal experience, when I started working in home care, I quite frankly had no idea what home care was, and it was probably the last place I expected to be when I was in business school and doing all the other things that I was doing. But it was an opportunity that presented itself, and I saw it as a challenge, as a growth opportunity. But I got to be honest with you, for probably the first year, I struggled. I struggled because I tried to put everything in a box, right? In business school, we're taught to look at scenarios, to look at processes, and everything has a flow. Everything fits in a perfect way in a case, and most cases have different outcomes. But if you apply certain procedures and processes, you can get to the root of the problem, and blah 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 blah, and all that nonsense that we learn. But what's missing in that picture is the environment, the real world. So after getting beat up significantly at my own doing, I decided the only way I'm going to understand this is if I walk in the shoes of the people that are being beat up and the ones I'm being beat up because of. And that's exactly what I did. I took off my tie, I took off my suit, I put on the uniform of a warehouse employee, and I spent the next 30 days between the warehouse, between our dispatch teams, with my drivers out on the road, with members of the customer service team. And I worked every shift because every shift was different. What happened in the morning didn't happen midday, didn't happen in the evening. What I saw, unbelievable. Some things spectacular, some things frightening. And aside from the obvious, right, which was it gave me the perspective, it also gave me the ability to walk up to someone, tap them on the shoulder, and say, that's not the way we do things here. That's incorrect. Why? Because I did it. I know exactly the way it's supposed to be done. That shadowing, which was self-imposed, gave me the opportunity to open my boundaries, open my borders, and incredibly find talent in areas where I didn't think it existed and in areas where no one had looked for years. And probably the most talented people of the company were working there. One of them being Ms. Montes, which you met in the last session, just because someone didn't listen, because that psychologically safe environment hadn't been created. On the contrary, it was the exact opposite of that. It was an environment of fear. It was an environment of the people at the top wanted to continue to be at the top, and anyone with a different idea created a risk, created a challenge to my position. So I'm telling you, the things you're going to find by leaving your office, shadowing employees in another department, shadowing your own employees. We talk about our employees shadowing each other, but what about us? How many of us still to this day know how every single process that we may have implemented 5-10 years ago hasn't changed? Is it still produce the same outcome? Is it still the right process? All things that we need to do in order to ensure that we're not missing anything and that team that we've put together still works, still makes sense, and everything still moves the way that it should. And then again, obviously, we need to make sure that the environment we're creating is one that is open to discussion, is open to new ideas, to innovative ideas, because that again is how we're going to get to drive this change that we're looking to, with innovation and with the ultimate goal of effective patient care in mind. So next is, have we created and are we promoting that psychologically safe environment? And from our readings in Della Zona, it's called the fuel for innovation. Psychological safety is the fuel for innovation. Why do you think they refer to psychological safety as a fuel for innovation? So I think we've also beat that one to death. When you create an environment that is open and honest, without judgment, and fueled by experience, enthusiasm, and ideas, where everyone, regardless of where they are in the hierarchy, whether they are the leader, whether they are the newest employee that still just knows how to write their name on the top of the paper, they haven't figured out anything else yet. But when you give way to that freedom within that team, obviously structured, you unleash an unbelievable potential and an unbelievable hunger for innovation. And it's difficult to do for all the reasons we've discussed, right? It's difficult to do because at the end of the day, as the leaders, we have a budget, we have a process, we have outcomes, we have very specific tasks that have been given to us of things that need to happen. And it's very easy to get caught up in that and say, all right, I know that in order to do these things, these 5 things have to exist. And we drive for those 5 things to exist. We drive for those 5 things to be executed the way that we believe is the best possible way to execute them. And unfortunately, we lose a lot in that process, right? Because we turn on these filters inadvertently, and we say that they're filters to block the noise that is keeping us from focusing and doing what we need to do. Yes and no. Sometimes they're filters to help us not hear the things that we feel are going to deviate us from how we expect this process has to be managed and how this project has to run in order to get the outcomes that we're looking for. So my challenge to you today is remove the filter, right? And it's not an easy thing to do. As leaders, as we've discussed over and over again, we're called to serve. We're given a task, and in most cases, the expectation is when one of our superiors, whether it's the CEO, the board of directors, your manager, a director, a vice president, whoever it happens to be, gives us a task. 9 times out of 10, they expect us to know what we need and what we need to do to move that task forward. They're not giving us an instruction book. They're not giving us all the ideas on how to put it together. That's why we exist, right? That's why we're the leader. We're the one that's supposed to have ideas. We're the one that's supposed to know the process. We're the one that's supposed to know where the tools are. And yes, We absolutely are. But at the same time, those of us that make the best leaders, the ones that develop every day as leaders, are the ones that realize that we don't know everything, right? And as much as 20 years of experience will give us, there's somebody that's got 30 years of experience and 40 years of experience. And there's some people that have zero experience, but have great ideas that nobody's listened to because they don't have any experience. So the idea goes by the wayside. I challenge you to go back to when you started and the first time you had an idea. Think of that person who gave you an opportunity. There's always one. We all have that one leader, that one mentor, that one boss that looks past all the noise, looks past previous bosses' comments or recommendations, looks past um, their own biases with regard to the person. And those biases could be anything. They could be cultural, they could be gender-based, they could be a number of things. But saw something in one of us, and that something sparked potentially a career, potentially a new opportunity. In some cases, a wake-up call to say, oh my goodness, this is not where I need to be. I am in the wrong, I'm in healthcare. I should be in artwork or in lawn care because healthcare is definitely not what I want to do. And, go back to that and try to be that leader for the people on your team. That is the fuel. You will become that fuel for innovation. Your ability to open up like that and to see past all those biases, to see past all the potential negativity that in most cases is rooted in selfishness. It's rooted in some preconceived idea. Look past all that. Give everybody the opportunity that you were given or that you expect to be given. And I promise you, the outcomes that you will see will be quick and they will be so much more significant than anything you've seen thus far. So, few of the key factors that we discussed a little bit earlier. So one is create an environment that invites competing ideas. And we talked a little bit about this when we were talking about hierarchies and we were talking about the composition of a team. It's not always going to be perfect, right? And you're going to put out a task. People are going to go home. They're going to think about this task and they're so excited. And I'm going to have all these ideas. And they're going to come back, spew out an idea, and it may be the exact opposite of what somebody else on the team thinks is the right thing. What you don't want to happen is for those two to become, you want them to compete, but you don't want them to become a problem where then you end up losing both the ideas, right? Because as we've all learned as leaders, in every competing idea, the real idea is living in there somewhere, right? I'm sure you've said this often. I know I've said it a bunch of times this happens with people in some cases. You look at different leaders and you say, man, if I could take 50% of this leader and this other 50% of this leader and put them together, I'd have super leader. I'd have the ultimate leader that anyone could expect. Same thing goes for ideas. Don't let the filter, don't let the bias, yours or the team's, keep good ideas from kind of blending together. Again, there isn't a perfect solution. Just like no one individual can drive innovation in a team, one idea is not going to drive change. It's not going to be, the invention of the wheel. It may be, but it may be in combination with other things. And one of the guys that I look at for some of the good things. There's a lot of things he did as a leader that I certainly would not do and would stay away from. But from an innovation standpoint, Steve Jobs was probably one of the most consequential business leaders we've had, in modern times. Obviously, we know he's the creator of Apple. He's a man who dropped out of college and just had this incredible intellect and this ability to create. And if you really take a step back and think about what did Steve Jobs create? He created drive, innovation. He created an environment for ideas. But what he was really good at doing was taking something that already existed and making it better, right? So let's go to the most common thing and the one that we use every day, our phones. So telephones have existed since Alexander Graham Bell. Cell phones existed, you know, in the mid 80s, we started to see the big giant block cell phones and suitcase cell phones and all that great stuff. And eventually we got to where the cell phones were this big and we don't know how people were able to dial the buttons because they were so small. So he didn't invent the cell phone. What he did is he took ideas from the cell phone maker. He took ideas from the computer makers. He took ideas from the guys who developed the internet and said, all right, all things that we need every day. So how do I take all these great ideas and all these great products and put them in your hands? And that's exactly what he did. And today we have the iPhone. And from the iPhone, we've obviously seen significant iterations of the iPhone and of other devices. But it was not being so close-minded, not thinking, I am the only one that's going to invent this thing. And my team is going to come up with the, I don't know, whatever phone, the finger phone. And that's going to be the one that's going to revolutionize everything. That's not what he did. He took what worked from the handheld phone, what worked from the land-based phone, what worked from the computer, what worked from the internet. And he found a way with his incredibly brilliant team to put all those things together and come up with a phenomenal product, and one that obviously has changed really how we communicate, how we do business, how we do so many things. So make sure your environment invites those competing ideas. The next is learning how to find common ground in disagreement. That is probably one of the most difficult things to do. Most of the time, disagreements really just, actually not most of the time, all the time, disagreements without emotion start off as just two differing ideas. Two people with two different points of view, and they both are selling their point of view. So what's the opportunity? The opportunity is, I have my point of view, and I'm going to do everything I can to sell you that idea because that's the one that's going to work. That's the groundbreaker. Bridget has one, John has one, Maria has one. So now you have 10 people on your team, and they all have their vision. Some of them may align because you're going to find people either because of familiarity, because they've worked together a long time, because they share a common view on how certain things should be done. Some ideas will come together, but you're still going to have a disagreement. Most leaders see disagreements as roadblocks. They see them as an opportunity for failure. They see them as a time to say, all right, we need to stop. We need to stop. This is what we're going to do. And all of a sudden it's, none of your ideas matter. The only one that matters is mine because you guys can't come up with anything that makes sense. You're arguing. So I'm going to tell you how we're going to do it. Terrible way to run a team. Now, you have to do that sometimes, right? Sometimes things are going in directions that aren't going to solve the problem and aren't being productive. And at the end of the day, you're responsible for ensuring the outcome of, whatever it happens to be, whether it's a specific project, whether it's a goal that was set for the year. But those are rare occasions. Teach your team how to find the common ground in the disagreement. What's the first question you ask? All right, John, this is how you want to do it. Walk me through how you would do that and why this is the best way to get to the outcome we're looking for. One of two things is going to happen. Either John really thought through his idea and he's going to give you his reasoning as to why this is the right way to do it and why he believes that ultimately his process is going to get us to the ultimate goal based on his idea. He may not. He may just have had a great idea that he threw out there. And, at that point, part of your job as a leader is to help him with that train of thought, right? So you're not going to put him on the spot, but you're going to say, you know what, John, that's a great idea. How about we think of how we're going to get to that? What would we have to do? What things would have to be true in order for us to get to that goal using that method? That process is going to generate thought amongst the rest of the team. Believe it or not, sometimes having just one discussion will probably bring a number of people onto one side because questions that they had that caused them to generate this different process are answered by the discussion that's being had by the team. And all of a sudden it's, oh, well, that's kind of the same thing I was thinking. It's just that you didn't say it like that. So, but I think that's a good idea. And before you know it, you've taken a room full of disagreement. You've probably narrowed things down to a couple of very good ideas, some that you may even be able to combine to get to the outcome that you want. But don't throw a blanket over it. Don't shut it up. Invite it. You can't let it get out of control, because then you'll lose complete control of the meeting, and you'll be in a meeting for one item for hours, and that's obviously not the goal. And that brings us to the next point, which is driving change through collaboration. Collaboration can take on so many different forms. We've talked about collaboration among unidisciplinary teams, among multidisciplinary teams, cross-departmental collaboration, cross-company collaboration. How many times are we collaborating with other entities and other companies to bring, ideas to bear, or to bring change to bear? And I'll give you a great example of a collaboration. Here in South Florida, we actually locally here with Leon and another partner, we put together a collaboration to bring a level of care to some of our most chronic and sickest patients that was being handled piecemeal until we got together. And it took putting the biggest egos in the room together. It took involving outside resources. We had to get assistance from our regulatory partners. We had to get assistance from other experts in the field. We needed to get legal assistance. So talk about multidisciplinary. You're talking about executives. You're talking about public service workers. You're talking about professionals, meaning attorneys. You're talking about physicians. You're talking about nursing staff. You're talking about lay staff, all to put these two incredible ideas that both worked very well independently together to create what, without a doubt, has become one of the most collaborative and one of the most effective deliveries of excellent care to patients, that I've seen in my over 20 years of experience in this field. So work together, work with anyone who you think is going to add, as we start looking at some of these real world examples, and we think about what are the drivers. Being in a static environment is deadly. I don't know if any of you have ever heard a quote, and I have to confess, I saw it on a poster on a wall and I thought it was great. It says, when the pace of change outside of your organization exceeds the pace of change inside your organization, it's time to find a new organization. What does that mean? If the outside world is changing at 50 miles an hour and your company's ability to adapt is moving at 10 miles an hour, you have a problem. At some point, you're going to die. Why? Because while you're chugging along at 10 because you're being careful and you're being very strategic and you're being very thoughtful, you're also keeping very ideas that have always worked in place, and you're not inviting new ideas. You're allowing the rest of the environment to find more efficient ways to do things, find more effective ways to deliver care, find better ways to deliver something specifically to patients. Telehealth is a great example of that. We can say all the things we want to say, and I have to tell you, I am a cautious fan of telemedicine, only because I am a firm believer that in order to really learn and know what's going on with a patient, you need to be able to put hands on that person. You need to be in front of them. You need to understand the environment. But if I get stuck there and think that's the only way to do it, what's going to happen? Somebody else is going to figure out how to do it. Somebody else is going to figure out a way initially to combine the televideo part with a person in the patient's home. Not that complicated. And then somebody's going to say, well, if I put a person there, why don't I give that person some diagnostic tools? And that way I can get some real live information. And if I gave them diagnostic tools, why don't I give them a laptop or a tablet? And maybe I can connect those diagnostic tools to that tablet, and maybe I can get that information fed into the medical record. And if I already have the information fed into the medical record, well, why don't I use some of these AI engines to help give me a better view into what's going on, with my patient? And not only that, why don't I expand that AI view to look at the entire data availability and compare it with data from other countries, other states, other patients that have similar diagnosis, similar demographics, similar lifestyles, and potentially maybe not find the solution for me, but help me drive a better result or a better outcome. So that's what we talk about when we talk about not having static environments and not being in these these deadly patterns that could unfortunately be the end of some of our, not at the end of the company in some cases, yes, but the end of innovation, right? And when you stifle innovation, you really you stifle everything, and you stifle human growth and human change. So a controlled dynamic environment fuels excitement, it fuels innovation. I'm going to give you a great example. We So two examples. One real short. We've we've built these incredible businesses, and as you can imagine, as you build a business and you home grow systems and you do things, you start piling onto these systems, and you every day you have a new idea, and you want it to do this, you want it to do that, and before you know it, you have this Frankenstein system that almost looks like a quilt that's been put together with 15 different patches of fabric, and they're all different colors, but it keeps you warm, it does what it needs to do, and it's yours, and it's soft, and you love it, and you don't want to change it, but you realize that if the temperature drops another 10 degrees, you're going to freeze because the quilt's just not, it's old, and it just doesn't have what it needs. So creating and deploying new systems is a great way to push innovation. And you may think, well, but what's the innovation? You bring the IT guys in and they build the system. Not really. What I learned the hard way is that in order to build a system, you have to understand the business. You have to understand every single solitary part of that business. And sometimes, most of the times, that requires everyone on your team. There's always going to be that one person that really knows it end to end. But so many things happen throughout the day and throughout the process and over time that even the person who knows it, who grills it, who, feeds it back to the staff, doesn't see some of the changes that happen organically where somebody realizes, oh, I can do this way with the system and it gives me a better result and it's faster. And it just becomes the norm. So bringing your teams together to collaborate on those new ideas is so incredibly important, especially when you're deploying new systems, because those systems are meant to make your life easier, to make the delivery of care easier for the patient, to make the employee's time more useful, and so that they don't feel that all they're doing is just spending time hammering away, that there's actually something that's helping them think more, be more productive, spend 5 more seconds on the phone with a patient, spend a minute on the phone longer with a patient, things that are going to improve that patient's experience. And the other example that I love is organic growth in an organization. And I'm going to be very specific. So we have a home health division here, and we visit patients in their homes. We provide them care all the way from our most delicate patients that are on ventilators with tracheostomies, being fed through tubes, to helping patients with an insulin injection every day, to providing physical therapy. And it's taken us a few years to really build a well-rounded, a solid team that collaborates, that innovates, that works together. I gave you an example in our previous lesson of how the team came together around one of their own who was going through a difficult time. But even for teams that are operating like that, things can become monotonous. It can become the same thing. So how do we drive that innovation? One, we ask them, what else could we be doing? What else do you think is if I gave you a magic wand, and everybody loves that one. If I gave you a magic wand and told you to wave it, what would be the thing that you would want beside a raise and beside a brand new car, a work thing? What are the things that you want? You'd be surprised at the things that you hear from our team. And we had an opportunity a couple of years ago to add a responsibility and more work to our nursing team. We had a problem here. We found a lot of our patients were, for whatever reason, running to 911 and to the hospital for anything and everything. That was their go-to. 911, go to the hospital. 911, go to the hospital. 80% of the time, something that could have been resolved either over the phone, it could have been resolved with a visit by a nurse to the patient's home, it could have been resolved by a visit to their primary care physician the next day, but they didn't know where else to go. That was the quickest one. And could they have called us because we have the resources to take those calls at any time of the day or night? They could. The problem was that, that was a longer process. So to call us, they had to dial 10 keys on their phone. To call 911, it's only 3. So the challenge that we put out was, all right, how do we reduce that? If 3 is 911, how do I get it to 2? How do I make it even easier for them to call us than to call their primary care, their 911? And we brought in an outside company. We presented them with the problem. We brought members of the team to collaborate with them and to talk through some of the things that they'd experienced and that the team had experienced in the field. And the end product, and rather quickly, was a device that the patient can wear, and the device detects if the patient falls, or the patient can push a button and the device dials. Now, you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, I've seen those. They're on TV. I've fallen and I can't get up. It's a pendant." You're absolutely correct, with a twist. We had to figure out a way for that pendant to call us, for that pendant to send a message to the patient's primary care physician, to the patient's caregiver, if they wished, to alert all the people involved in the care of that patient. So we're back to, what's that team? In this case, that team is customer service. It's the nursing team. It's the patient's primary care physician. It's the patient. It's the patient's caregiver. It's the player, that the company that created the device. So we came up with a great device that gives us everything we were looking for, but we added more work to our team. If I tell you that they were so excited when they found out that we were adding something that was different, something that broke the monotony of wound care, insulin injections, running an IV. This was different. This was a patient that could have been calling because they were lonely, could have been calling because they thought they wanted to make sure that the device worked. Even though it was more work, because we had to create second on-call teams in case these calls came in overnight, which some of them do. But they were excited. That innovation, that change was exciting, and it helped them grow. What came of that? Well, those nurses in the field said, well, hold on a second. If I get this call and this thing goes off and the patient, I get to the patient's home and I know they're running a fever and it looks like it could be urinary related because I read in the chart that the patient is frequently has UTIs. What do I do? I'm stuck. I still have to call 911. So we got together and we said, well, why don't we do a point of care test in the patient's home? Said, all right, great. Another innovation, point of care. And then we said, well, hold on a second. So we did a point of care. It's positive. Now what do we do? So we brought in another member to the team. We brought in our medical director and said, listen, we solved for this. We've identified these additional opportunities, and now we're stuck again in the event that there's an issue. So the medical director got together with a clinical team, and they went through a list of interventions and other opportunities that he felt comfortable having direction given to the persons that were in the field to begin initial treatment for those patients, to begin a triage that could lead to an emergency room visit or could lead to a visit back to one of our urgent care centers or back to the patient's primary care physician on the next day. So that new idea, which came from a necessity, blossomed into multiple ideas. And I can tell you that right now, that same team, without a change in number of participants on the team, has deployed 4 additional new ideas outside of the original scope of what they did, But the fact that it's new and it's different and it shows them that the organization is thinking and that the organization is outpacing the rest of the industry has really given them a revitalization in their role. So don't be afraid to push the edge of the envelope. Don't be afraid to really understand what are the legal, the regulatory limits of my team, and are we working right to the very tippy top of those legal regulatory scope of practice limits. And if we're not, that's a great opportunity for innovation. That's a great opportunity to do something different, and that something that will set your organization apart from the rest of the organizations that we compete with and we deal with on a daily basis. So the next couple of slides really talk about some of the things that we've discussed. We talk about team composition. We talk about the introduction of multidisciplinary rounds and teams. In this case, the example that's given, the multidisciplinary round was effective in treating conditions and improving conditions like congestive heart failure, pneumonia. It decreased length of stay for trauma patients. So similar to the example that we just discussed. And again, the competencies are knowledge, skills, attitudes. Do we have the right team? Have we put the right people to work? And are they the ones that are helping us drive the results and the outcomes that we're looking at? And at the same time, are we creating that environment that feeds innovation and feeds that hunger that we all have inside to do something different, to be on the cutting edge? And is our leadership one that is inviting, inspiring? Is it sustainable? This is in the end a marathon. It's not a sprint race. Every day is a small race, a small victory. What are we doing to help sustain that? Are we going back and revisiting situations where the outcome wasn't what we wanted, and we need to restructure a process. We need to change the approach we took on an outcome. Are we creating these solutions across disciplines, extending our boundaries so that all the people that are involved have the opportunity to provide the input and to bring in ideas that we probably wouldn't have found had we not brought all these people in. And in the end, are we trying to do away with these undiscussable risks that we talked about yesterday, where over 85% of respondents, in this case nurses in the study, were in situations where there were disregards for safety, where people were taking dangerous risks, where there was communication breakdowns, where there was people that were potentially being disrespectful, and all these things were creating harm in most cases to patients, but nobody said anything, or they said something, but not everything they needed to say, and in some cases not to whom they needed to say it. So as we wrap up this unbelievable 4-lesson experience that we've had, and we look at how we've built our ideal team, our ideal scenarios, we've looked at all the things, all the boogeymen, all the things that could come from the outside and hurt the team and hurt the outcome, we realize that there's a lot of common sense here. And I hope that's been evident throughout the discussion. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're not, coming up with the next element on the periodic table of elements. We're doing what Steve Jobs did. We're looking at a product. We're looking at a desired outcome. We're looking at all the different opportunities and ideas that are around us. And we're saying, how do I take this product that works well and make it better? How do I make it ours? And how do I create an environment that makes this contagious? Improvement, growth, innovation has to be contagious. If it's not, if you don't make it contagious, I promise you, your team, that one person will take it, go somewhere else, and it will be contagious, and it will spread, and they will pass us by. So take the opportunity to look at your teams. Take some of the examples that we've discussed and take them back, and look for areas where some of these things may have been prevalent. Maybe not the exact same opportunity or exact same situation, but something similar. And challenge yourself every day. Ask yourself, have I hit on all of these topics every day as a leader? Have I improved the composition of my team? Have I made sure that my team feels comfortable, safe, that the environment that I'm creating isn't one of fear, but one of ideas and of innovation? Do I have a hierarchy that's one, understandable, and two, that promotes change, promotes action, promotes ideas, not stifling and potentially creating buckets of potential negative outcomes? And finally, is all this that I've put together driving the innovation that my team needs, that I need, that my company needs, and more importantly, that my patients need? Thank you all very much. It's been great talking with you, and until we meet again.